The next planet, Uranus, although significant in its process, I found in my research that there was nothing too much going on the planet except the completion of the process of removal of all the iron, sulfate, and the other chemicals, which gave it its characteristic greenish, bluish color, which was the beginning of the transitionary period for the commencement of the cobalt extraction, or process where the cobalt was being ionized out of the planet, and the iron was mixing with the cobalt. So you had very many processes where the coloration of the planet was moving from the brownish color of Saturn through to a sort of clearish color that would have brought you to the next step, where you would have iron, sulfates, FES, chemicals or compounds, which would create a situation where it would change the entire coloration of the planet. Also for Uranus would be the rings around Uranus, the ring around Uranus, which would be again based on the strength of the ferromagnetism of it, and which would be prevalent from north to south, which is an indication of the dominance of the magnetic field created by arriving at the Curie point of cobalt, which would allow you to then look at the planet in terms of its strength and the magnetic strength as concerns cobalt. So this planet Uranus, which is a transitional planet, is indicative of further decomposition, and with most of the process completed with the iron, there would have been just a small quantity of iron taking advantage of the energy and beginning the transition of the cobalt. The transition of the cobalt, which would complete in the commencement of the next stage of planetary evolution, which is stage 2 deionization, which would be prevalent in Uranus. So deionization 1, which would commence and occur in Saturn, and the second stage of deionization, but deionization concerning chromium, which would be beginning its process in Uranus and then moving on to be completed in Neptune. So looking at the planets in terms of their structure, one would be very clear as far as the coloration, and in doing my research as far as the coloration and the temperatures that were necessary, you found that iron sulfate was very dominant a force at between 600 to 700 degrees centigrade, which means that at that temperature there is a greater susceptibility for the ions in the sulfate form to want to leave the planet, and to be allowed to leave the planet by the energy that they would take out of the remaining energy of the planet, which would have been the planet which was Saturn. So in looking at the development of the planet and looking at the decomposition of this process, it's necessary to understand that each element, starting with iron and then cobalt and then nickel, would be exhibiting its own ferromagnetic power, and it's this ferromagnetism which is of a critical importance in the evolution of the planet, firstly, then on to Uranus, which is where we are now, and then on to Neptune, which is the next planet. So you would see, if you look at the color of Google and look at the color of Uranus, you would recognize that that planet and the colors of that planet would be remnants or transitional planet between the remnants of iron and the beginnings of cobalt. And this would be what that planet is primarily affected by. We wouldn't go too much into the details of the chemistry of it and the physics of it, but because it can get complicated. But for a layman's perspective, and to begin your earnest research in understanding it, it would help to just understand the basics of the process that would assist in understanding that these planets didn't appear on their own, but as a precise process of evolution. As a man is born a child and becomes a middle-aged man and grows old and dies, the stage we are at is where you have the entire process of rotting of the planet, if you want to put that word in place, where you have only the skeleton. And what the stage which we are moving now is the stage closer to that skeletal position of the planet, if you're looking at it in a scientific manner, that the planet is moving from a rotting planet in Jupiter through most of the process of rotting occurring in Saturn, and moving on to the final processes of completion which occurs in Uranus, and then to complete itself in Neptune, which we will move on in a few minutes. The focus there, with that understanding, is that I want you to have a perspective of it, not as human beings, but looking outside of it and looking at it as a natural phenomenon, that whether or not we were on the planet, the only reason why we were on planet Earth is because the environment was conducive to the formation of, should I say, advanced proteins, which became as advanced to be able to fix the energy of the sun. And the competitive nature of the process required that we became more and more intelligent to be able to fix those energies. And as we advance, it comes to a point now where if we want to sustain human life as a species, we have to learn our environment and learn the processes that are involved in the longevity of our environment, to learn the processes that are involved in the sustenance of our environment, and to understand when our environment will no longer exist and the time that it will take to no longer exist. So as a result of that, we can make informed, intelligent decisions as far as the use of our resources are concerned. So rather than building nuclear weapons, we can use some of that energy, tremendous amount of energy which we've been given, to look at building ships and looking at building structures that will allow us to escape a certain demise that we are faced with if we do not pay close attention to what is about to happen.